Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Tempty. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Jonno White joining us. Jonno is the co-founder of Clarity Group Global and is also the author of Step Up or Step Out, How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. So, as you might expect, today's episode is going to be about constructive conflict and difficult conversations. Welcome to the show, Jonno.
Awesome to be here. Thanks for having me, Andy.
So, Jonno, before we get started, I ask all my guests this question. Please give us the elevator pitch version of your story.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Well, what I love to say is I think I know some people in the leadership space sometimes talk about how they nailed it as a leader for 20 years. Here are their secrets. My background for me was when I had my first opportunity to really be a leader. A couple of months in, I realized, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm doing, and felt incredibly discouraged. And that was the point for me where I started reading and learning and going, how do you build a team? And lots of highs, lots of lows. Some of the biggest lows and mistakes I made is where my book came out of, because I had the best intentions, but absolutely hurt other people and myself, and went, there must be a better way to have constructive conflict. And so, long story short, I started Clarity Group Global with my wife, Liz, 9 years ago. And really, I specialize in facilitating leadership team offsites, executive team retreats. So CEOs, school principals bring me in, and I do a lot of work with their leadership teams around conflict, team dynamics. And what we talk about is we help leaders to build the type of workplace culture that employees would move cities to work at. So that's the big goal. How do you build the kind of place that people go, wait a second, Andy's hiring. Oh my goodness, I would consider moving my whole family there because I want to be part of that. Yeah. That's the big picture of what we do. And that's the elevator pitch.
Yeah. So for our listeners who are maybe hearing a bit of an Australian accent, tell us where they're finding you today.
Yeah, of course. So I'm based in Brisbane, Australia. What I tend to say at the moment, as cliched as it is our claim to fame is we're going to be hosting the 2032 Olympics. So that's that we're all excited over here in Brisbane. And I'm married to Liz. As I mentioned, we run the business together, and we have a 7-week-old daughter, Giovanna, who's brand new and fresh and just keeping our household on our toes. And just the most gorgeous little toddler who's nearly turning 3, a little boy, Roman.
Is Roman at that kind of bounding around stage, arms out all the time, just running everywhere?
Oh yeah, there's a place that Aussies will know, and if anyone, it's called Bunnings, and it's a part of Australian culture. It's where Aussies go to do their do-it-yourself hardware, and it's basically where every Australian ends up on the weekend at some point to go and get something for their house. And I took Roman there the other day for 2 hours, and yes, it was the equivalent of maybe a 10-hour. I just feel like anywhere I go with him right now is just non-stop chasing around this little bundle of curious energy, which is one part delightful, one part exhausting.
Yes, absolutely. So, Jonno, if you had to pick one event in your life that was a key accelerant for you, other than what you've told us so far, what would that be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, it would be a mentor that I had. And I remember that I was a time in my life where I really felt called to make a significant impact, but I was in some jobs in business development and marketing, and I just looked around and thought, oh man, I don't really see where I'm making an impact. And in that same season of life, I sought out a mentor. I'm part of a Baptist church here in Brisbane. I've been there since I was 1, so I've got a great community. My wife and our family, we're still part of it. We have 5 campuses. We're part of one. So for us, that's been a really special part of my life since I was 1. And it was someone in my church who I reached out and said, "What do you think about being a mentor?" And he said yes. And so that was probably one of the biggest, if you're talking about a real transformation, because once I was meeting regularly with him, I think that really helped to shift my perspective. And then, kind of unsurprisingly, that was the season within those couple of years where I really stepped into my first leadership role, and that, like I said, was then when I realized I didn't know what I was doing, and fast forward to what I'm doing now. So I'd say that role, having his name's Derek Peters, having Derek as a mentor was probably one of the most accelerating events in my life to this point.
Yeah, and you are to be commended, because so many individuals, especially early career, don't make that move and take that initiative to reach out and ask somebody to play the role of a mentor. And so much is lost in not having a strong mentor group around you. So kudos and thank you for that lesson that our listeners can take away. If you're listening to this and you feel like you don't have the right mentorship environment, you got to reach out. It's not going to miraculously appear around you. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I'd say the one tip I'd say is think about the most obvious person that you'd reach out to, and then stop and think one or two levels bigger as well. Someone where you think, oh man, I'd love that person. You know, maybe they're in your network because they're a friend's parent, and they're doing the type of leadership role or something, or in the type of industry where you think I would love to be like them one day. You'd be amazed how receptive people are when you reach out and ask, even just to say for a coffee, and just ask them to think about being a mentor. I think we severely underestimate how meaningful it is for the mentor themselves, and how excited they get when someone asks. It doesn't always work. Depends on the season, right? You might get a no, you might get rejected, but that's also a good life lesson. But you got to ask that person where you think with a bit of trepidation, oh, I don't know if I even have the right to ask, because you'll be amazed at how often they'll say, you know what? Yeah, let's do this.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the traps that we get ourselves into. And we're going to talk today, as we talk about conflict and difficult conversations, we get ourselves stuck in all sorts of traps. So let's go on to conflict avoidance. Let's start there. Why do so many of us avoid conflict? The weight and pain of not resolving a challenge seems like it should be worse than confronting, but many people take the quote-unquote easy way out. Talk to us about why so many of us avoid conflict.
Yeah, it's a great question. And as I think about myself, when I talk about the biggest mistake I made in this area, and I had the best intentions. That's the first thing I'd say, is I really did want to do the right thing by the people I was leading. And I wanted the best for them. And at the same time, I confused. I love what Patrick Lencioni says about how we can confuse being nice with being kind.
Right.
And that was my confusion. I confused being nice with being kind. I thought, you know what? I don't want to go there. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to micromanage. I don't want to pick on them. I don't want to hurt their feelings. All valid, except when you zoom out, what I actually did by not having these little conflicts, because it was uncomfortable in the moment, and potentially, this is something I always say when we're having these conversations, is I think sometimes we have a little dream, a little utopia that we imagine, where Jonno and Andy have a difficult conversation and we're both laughing and it's really pleasant and comfortable. And it's like, no. If you're having any of these type of conversations, it's always going to be uncomfortable. And that is why we don't want the uncomfortable moment. But I also think it's a lot of leaders have the best intentions. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to micromanage. And so that's why we avoid these little conflicts, because we think we're doing the right thing by not going there in that moment.
Yeah, and we also suffer from wishful thinking that this challenge is going to somehow miraculously disappear if we just wait long enough. I know I've suffered from that wishful thinking before.
I love that. I hadn't heard it phrased like that before, but it's so true. It's
Yeah.
which is so funny when you think about it. But I think right from the start, one of the things we do around this area as leaders, specifically when you're managing employees, is for a leader in that role, when you first have someone start, it's so easy with your wishful thinking. And you can do it again and again and think, what is wrong with me? But you start off by going, you know what? I could have a bit of an awkward, uncomfortable conversation about some of the expectations, but they're such a nice person. They seem so competent. Maybe we'll just skip that for now because I've got other things to do, and I don't really want to start off the relationship like that. And then you look back and think, why do I do that? Like, it would be so much better. Surely I've learned by now that if I can be clear from the start, it's better, even if it's uncomfortable. So yeah, I love that idea of wishful thinking. It's so true.
Yeah. So tell us about your book, Step Up or Step Out. If you had the power to ensure that every reader took away one key message from the book, what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess the one key message really connects to what I just said then, and that is that ultimately we make the mistake of skipping the little conversations, the little specific, being clear and early with feedback, and we think we're doing the right thing, and instead we wait, and then finally something pushes us, and we have what I call a one-off big battle. And so the big idea of the book is that really, if you can step in, I don't normally add another step in there, but if you can normally lean in and have those small conversations, give that feedback early and be clear with it, that is the key. You save yourself from having what we see everywhere, these big conflicts where people kind of walk away going, what just happened? Like, I went in there wanting the best, and I feel like I've absolutely crushed that person's spirit, or they got so defensive and crushed me back. So that's the big idea, is stop having the big one-off moments and embrace the early, clear feedback. And the book is about how to do that.
Yeah, and it relates to things like performance evaluations, the dreaded once-a-year performance evaluation where both sides are so nervous. Everybody gets all spun up, and so nothing is heard. A lot is said, but nothing is actually heard and retained. So what I'm hearing is really akin to a continuous improvement journey where you're making small but significant steps forward in a relationship instead of the big bang. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I'd add to that is that expectations are everything. And so what tends to happen is, and this is part of the problem with the once a year performance management, where the person goes, I just have no idea what I'm going to hear in this. Am I 50% better than they expected getting a pay rise, or am I being put on a performance management plan? And it's because, so if you go back to the foundation of that continuous improvement, of these little conversations, it's about setting clear expectations about that. I mean, most people that we're dealing with are actually turning up and wanting to do their best. They're turning up and they're wanting to make a positive difference. They're wanting to enjoy their work. And so as a leader in that context, and it works for anyone in any of these conversations, you actually need to set the expectations about how you're going to do that journey. And once you say to someone, and I outline in the book what I call the self-deprecating apology. And the self-deprecating apology is super powerful because often I work with leaders and it's gotten to the point where they're about to have the big bang. They're about to have the, should I let this person go or manage them, put them on a performance management plan. And it's actually, if you want to do this process really well, it's about going and kind of going back to square one and saying the self-deprecating apology looks like actually owning part of it as a leader. And I've done this with people where I said, you know what? One of the things I've reflected on is I don't think I've been as clear as I could have been about some of the expectations. And I know for a fact there's been little moments where I could have probably given some feedback and I've chickened out. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What I'd like to do moving forward, one thing I want to grow in as a leader is really get clear together on what those expectations are. And then, I just want you to know that I'm going to try to lean in And if there's something I see, I'm going to try to share it, like the little things, and work on that together, even if I'm really shaking in my boots. And when that's done authentically, not as a manipulative tactic, but actually it lowers the guard for both of you. It allows the other person to say, no, I would like to know where I stand. I have been wondering, and so that is often from there. Then a week later, when you do pick up on something, then you're able to say, hey, remember last week I said I was going to do this. I just noticed that that meeting that we had this morning, you were a couple of minutes late to that. What's going on? And so it gives you I think it creates the context where it's not aggressive, it's not personal, it's not, so that is a really key part to it as well. If you can get that right and then do the little moments well, people imagine that it's going to be, I don't know, sometimes when I share that with people, they think it's really mean or horrible, but when you actually play it out, it's often really cordial, and there's often moments of angst, sure, but it's not that big relationship breaking conflict.
Yeah. No, I can see how that would work really well. Jonno, we're going to take a really short commercial break, and we'll be right back to have more conversations about difficult conversations. Hey, it's Andy here. I've got a new podcast I'd like to introduce you to, The Saturday Morning Muse. Start your weekend with me by exploring topics that span leadership, business management, education, and other musings that are designed to support your journey of personal and professional continuous improvement. Subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. And we're back talking with Jonno White about constructive conflict and difficult conversations. Jonno, let's talk about something that not a lot of people talk enough about, which is the genius jerk in our midst. This is the individual who adds significant value to the business, but makes everyone miserable and is really a pathogen to the organizational culture. Why do so many leaders find it so difficult to rid their organizations of the genius jerks in their midst?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all been there. I've done it myself, I think, as well. And I think it's because we believe a myth as leaders, and the myth is that person is irreplaceable.
Yes.
And as part of that, we protect them because we see the KPIs are easy to see. If they're super competent, one of the easiest examples, I guess, would be in sales, right? If you've got someone who's bringing in the money and you just see that, that KPI being hit every month. What's the hidden cost around letting a genius jerk continue behaving the way they've been behaving? Once again, I'll mention Patrick Lencioni because I really love his work. I use it a lot in my consulting, and he talks about peer-to-peer accountability. And when we talk a lot about accountability, but if you think about accountability for the genius jerk, what we're really talking about here is that I'm the leader. I've got a genius jerk on my team and I'm not holding them accountable. And what happens is we look at it, and if I'm sitting with a leader, okay, one of the things we see is, okay, a negative thing that's happening here is we're letting them get away with jerky behavior. Sure, everyone acknowledges that. What a lot of leaders don't realize is that when you allow people to get away with that poor behavior culturally, you actually not only let that fester, but there's this massive other side of the coin that is the true loss for an organization. And that is that over time, your best people, I'm talking about the people that light up the culture of your place. I'm talking about your high performers from creating the type of place that people love to come to work. Those people watch you. And a couple of things happen that Lencioni points out. He says the first thing that happens is those people watch you and they say, okay, well, if you're not going to deal with their behavior, then I'm not either. Right. So you actually lose some of the power of peer-to-peer accountability. And then the second thing, and this is the real kick, this is when leaders often realize they need to do something about this person, is that top cultural performer says, I'm out. Yeah. They say, if you won't deal with that person and hold them accountable, then I want to be somewhere where that type of behavior is held accountable. And then when you lose them, that's when you realize, oh my goodness, yes, there were some KPIs that they were hitting, but there was a lot else that I was completely missing, that they were incredibly powerful in my organization, and now I've lost them. And so I think that's that's why leaders put up with the genius jerk, because they don't see that long-term cost. They don't truly value what the high performers culturally are bringing. And then it all comes, it all comes out at some point when you lose those best people. And that's when they often say, I've got to do something about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jonno, I'm teaching at my local university, and my students ask me fairly frequently for advice on engaging in challenging conversations. I'm inviting you into the classroom right now. You're walking in, you're saying hello, they're getting to know you. But what's the most important advice you can give them right now regarding challenging conversations as they embark out into the world?
Yeah, absolutely. If I could only give one piece of advice, this is what I do with teams, left, right, and center. No matter who the team is, if it's a small business or if they have 10,000 staff, if I'm working with that executive team and they need to have challenging conversations with each other, which they often do, the biggest thing that helps them, and that I'd say the one piece of advice for your students, is to think about the gap between you and the other person. And what I mean by that is I'm talking about the relational gap. I'm talking about the emotional gap between you. And so what happens is the further away, so if you think about this in the context of an executive team, you've got two people, the further away they are from each other, the less connected they are, the less they know about each other, the more likely they are to do these things, to look at each other, and they're far away. So it's easy to say, you have it out for me. Oh, you're actually not a very nice person. Oh, did you do that? Did you drop that part of the project to have a go at me? Or, and to be blunt, I think it's also saying maybe they're just an idiot. Maybe they just hate me. And this is where these really strong. So what I do with teams is I help them do this. And I know it sounds really simple and obvious, but the closer I can get, if I use us as an example, the closer I can get to Andy, when I understand who Andy is, when I understand Andy's background and what he's been through, when I understand how Andy's wired, what are the things that drain the life out of him? What are the things that light him up? When I understand that about a person, obviously this is really important in a team. They need to go super deep on these things. Then when Jonno drops the project, Andy's initial reaction is to think, Jonno, what's he like? Why did it? And then you stop yourself and you go, wait a second, no, I know Jonno. I know that he is great at this, this, and this, but one of the things he struggles with is that. I know that. So now when I'm approaching, when we're going into that challenging conversation, it's way less about the conversation itself and what you say in it, and it's much more about the relationship you have with each other and the work you've done prior around how you communicate. Once again, what tends to happen across all of life is that we don't go there in the little moments. We let things fester, and then we think, and so for the students in your class, they might have a challenging conversation. But my question would be, which is part of the book, is okay, when it comes to this, this might not be a leadership thing. This might be a sibling or a parent, whatever it is, or as another student. Okay, the first question is, ask yourself, out of 10, how clear are you on the expectations in this area between you and this person? And when you think about it, you go, okay, between me and my sibling about this thing that I was just ready to jump in and confront them on, it's like, okay, how clear am I on what we're talking about? Okay, well, maybe sometimes people say I'm a 10. Looks super clear. We've talked it out. It's always been clear and I know it 100%. Mm-hmm. But sometimes even doing that, people stop and they think and they go, well, I'm probably a 5. Like there is a little bit of ambiguity there. Okay, so the next question is, if you can try to empathize and think about it from their shoes, how clear are they out of 10 on what your expectations are in this?
Right.
And this is where what I talk about in the book, which is really might be one of the ultimate litmus tests. So if you're students, if there's one thing to look for in challenging conversations and beware, whether in work, in life, this is what you want to, if you see this, go back to square one, and start again. And that is surprise. If you see the element of surprise, when you see, okay, I just want to chat to you about this, and the person goes, oh, in a work situation, Andy, what do you mean? I thought I've been doing great in that area. When there's an element of surprise and shock at what you're talking about, that always unless you have the sort of 1% where it might be a personality disorder or something really serious from, working with someone who's a narcissist and has completely unrealistic expectations. Sure, but 99% of the time, what that shows is you haven't done the work in that relationship beforehand. That's the work. You do that work, and that makes the challenging conversation infinitely easier.
Yeah, and not to turn this into a Patrick Lencioni love fest, but I had him. I actually spent 2 episodes with Patrick last summer. He was episode 150 and 151 of the show. Super excited to meet him. But his firm has developed this new assessment called the Working Geniuses, and it's all about understanding the work styles of the people who are around you. And I've found that that's a really great way to break the ice on what you're talking about, which is bringing people closer together, getting them to understand their personalities and the way that, and this is what I like about the Lencioni assessment framework, is the way it's all about the way of working. And where the strengths, it's really a strengths and less strong, not to say weaknesses, but strengths and less strong kind of a thing. So thank you so much for that. Now, you got my class still sitting in front of you. Really quickly, what are 2 human skills that they need, or soft skills that they should be honing right now to have better challenging conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. The first one, from my podcast, Leadership Conversations with Jonno White podcast, 235 episodes, not just giving a plug, but it's connected to this fact.
Nice.
200 hours with leaders, right? And there's one thing that has shocked me more than anything else, that leaders in their 70s who just have a career of leading amazing organizations, they talk about this again and again, and it's really blown me away. And that is, and I know we've all heard it before, but more than anything else, the soft skill of listening. And I talk about the 3 Ps of listening. So I'd say for your students, the first thing around that soft skill is pause. So when we're listening, we think, I'll just try to listen. But it's amazing. When I'm coaching people, I actually pause for 15 seconds. So I try not to jump back in. I'm always waiting 15 seconds. And 90% of the time, 5 seconds in, 10 seconds in, sometimes 14 seconds into my silence, which my coachees get used to, they pick it up again and keep going. And that's because that time is spent thinking. So if you want to listen well as a soft skill, learn to pause. And for me, it works. Everyone doesn't have to do it. I count in my head.
Nice.
As I'm sitting there, because it's such a counterintuitive skill. So you pause, then you prompt. So I don't just sit there silently for 15 seconds. I'll say, yeah, or, that makes sense, Andy. So we prompt back to them to show that and then paraphrase. If 15 seconds runs out, Jonno's got 10 ideas he wants to say. But no, what I need to do next, people don't feel heard when you understand them. People feel heard when they understand that you understand them. And so when it comes to feeling heard, when your penny drops, like, I get what Andy's saying. Andy doesn't feel heard by Jonno. Andy will feel heard by me when I paraphrase back to him what I've heard him say. And then he'll go, okay, that's when he'll understand that Jonno understands him.
Yeah.
And so the 3 Ps of active listening, if your students can do that, that soft skill is not only in challenging conversations but in life is so important. And then I'd say the second one when it comes to soft skills is really around, like, if you're really nailing down the listening and how you're doing that, then I'd say the other part of that would be how to communicate clearly. And this is for me. I remember having someone on my podcast recently, and he talked about how for him, just naturally, just how he was wired, he would kind of hang on to things. He'd see something and it kind of said it, but he'd think, I don't want to be that leader. I don't want to go there with them. And so he wouldn't say it and he'd move on. And it sounds like that's a nice thing to do, right? Like, yeah, he's not just reacting. But what happened is he had one of his staff one time say to him, hey, can I just say, I feel like you're walking around with stuff you haven't told me. I know it's just a vibe. Like, and he thought, oh my goodness, you're sensing that. It's like you're sensing that I'm sitting on this stuff. And so that soft skill of being able to communicate, particularly if you can listen really well, then I think some of the best conversations I've heard about, just one really brief one to share is I had another person on my podcast when he was an early teacher. He was, students loved him. He was popular. He was this young guy in his mid-20s, but his class was a bit rowdy, and he had this older teacher next door to him. And she said to him one day, she said, "Hey, look, I just want to say that if you don't learn to control your class's behavior, then you're actually not doing the best thing for them. You're not going to get the best out of them." And even though they had that relationship, they'd worked together. And this is what can happen when we have, this is the downside of challenging conversations, is sometimes when you do choose to go there. He was so offended. He's like, for the next year I was there, I was like a bit offended about that, right? It really hit my pride. He goes off to other schools, ends up becoming a head of school 10 years later. And he comes back for something at this school and he sees her. He goes up to her and he says, "You know what? That feedback you gave me in the way you just succinctly, like, yes, it hit me hard at the time, but that is what really changed that allowed me to become a head of school." And so if you can learn, I guess, which is something I'm really not great at yet, but I think it's that ability to, if you can listen really well, but then find a way to communicate to the people in your life, and particularly if you're the leader, that is truly kind to them, where you're telling them what they really need to hear. If you can learn to communicate that well, even if they'll walk away and maybe be a bit offended for a time, I think that is, and I see that everywhere. We all know those people where we think, I'm so thankful that they told me straight, even though I was, a bit annoyed at them for a little while. If you can learn how to do that and give, and those two together, that's a bit of a superpower.
Yeah, don't hold it in, because what I've found in my career is that you never know the small moments that might seem inconsequential to you in that moment, that 10 years later, that person comes back and says, "Wow, that thing that you said to me on Tuesday, the 22nd of August, whenever, that just shook my world and made me a better person, or made me realize X or Y." So don't, as a leader, don't underestimate that. Be a great listener, but also you have to speak the words. Jonno, we're running out of time. I got 3 lightning round questions for you. I really want to get to them. Yep. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. You've just won $100 million lotto jackpot, Australian dollars. But there's a stipulation that 50% of your net winnings go to one philanthropic organization or a cause. Who do you pick?
So there's a group called Bloom, and they are an organization in Asia that works with young women who have been through human trafficking from a very young age. And they don't pull them out of that, but they then, because what people don't realize is 90% of those girls will end up back in the horror because of the context, the ecosystem. So they actually help them, once they've been rescued, to build themselves and their life and their families so that they stay out of that and can have generational change. They'd be my choice.
That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. If you had access, second question, I give you access to a rudimentary time machine. You can send a message to an earlier version of Jonno White. What's the message, and what previous version of yourself do you send it to?
Look, I send it to 17-year-old Jonno, and the message would be, don't lose so much sleep about what you achieve in the next 10 years. And I feel like everyone kind of goes through that. But I think if 17-year-old Jonno could know that just go out and treat everything as a learning and experience, that mentoring thing, get alongside some people where you just can't believe you're in the room with them, and hang out with them, no matter the cost, no matter if you're having to do an internship for free to spend time with them, because that's the kind of stuff that really matters once you get into your 30s and beyond, is those things. And it's less about what you can achieve in the short term.
Yeah. Great advice to yourself and everybody else. Last question. We're all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
It's very timely, actually, because I am always working with leaders, right? Leadership. And I work with amazing visionary leaders. I work with leaders who are so high capacity that it just shocks me. They're doing amazing things and they're like, I need something else to keep me interested on the side. And so one of my biggest growth things that I'm learning about myself is that's not actually Jonno. And that's really hard to admit because I want to be that guy. Instead, what I'm learning more and more about myself is that I'm amazing with ideas and coming up with ideas, inventing and pondering and getting alongside leaders and helping them transform that. But I'm having to let go of and I'm going to execute this and build this amazing thing, which for me has been, I guess, a little bit of a sacred cow to go, okay, maybe that's not my strength. And that when you accept that reshapes everything I do. And so I guess it's an area that I'm deciding to stop trying so hard to grow in because I think it's a bit of a weakness for me, and instead trying to reshift my mindset about myself and accept that I am wired differently. There's things that other people can do there that I'm actually really not good at. And so how can I move more into the space of where I am at my best, even if that looks very different to what other people do?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Jonno, where can folks find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so the easiest place for podcast listeners is my podcast, the Leadership Conversations with Jonno White podcast. 235 episodes, and that's a great place to do that. Obviously, my book, Step Up or Step Out, How to Deal with Difficult People, even if you hate conflict, that's on Amazon or Audible if you're an audiobook listener like me, and other places too. And then consultclarity.org is our website. But I'd also encourage people, if they're interested in chatting with me or having me work with their team, just send me an email. And that's Jonno, Jonno. That's the very unique Aussie. We shorten everything with an O. Jonno@consultclarity.org. I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. Jonno, it's been such a pleasure to meet you today, and I'm sure our listeners got great value from this conversation and your words. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Had a great time.
Excellent. My name is Andy Tempty. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this really impactful conversation with your friends and your colleagues. The show is produced by Nicholas Tempty, and we'll see you next time on The Balancing Act.